Hi, everyone. Welcome. Happy Wednesday. I'm Tasha. I'm a member of the Yibu Digital team, and welcome to our discussion about GA4, Google Analytics, changing things up. What is that going to mean for your nonprofit? And I'm here with two of my team members. I'll let them introduce themselves and kind of their background as they're chatting, but we're just going to kind of pick apart something that a lot of nonprofits are hearing more and more about. There's deadlines coming up. There's work to be done. And so we're kind of ending off 2022 with some information on Google Analytics 4. So I'll let you both introduce yourself. Trevor, why don't you jump in first?
Sure. Hi, everyone. So I'm Trevor Ryckman. I'm the manager of digital marketing services and lead strategist at Rubadeau Digital. Essentially, myself and my team are responsible for executing paid media campaigns, email campaigns, and of course, as it relates to this conversation, dealing with Google Analytics, conversion tracking, and all the wonderful frustrations and benefits that come along with it.
Awesome. Perfect. And our other colleague, Erik.
Yeah. Good afternoon, everyone. Hi, Mom. Erik Rubadeau, founder and CEO here at Yibu Digital. I'm a about 20-year digital fundraising and technology specialist, and dug into Google Analytics early in my career. So it's always been kind of an underpinning thread of how I understand the opportunities in our space. So super happy to be talking about it today.
Awesome. Wonderful. Thanks, guys. And I'm going to be keeping an eye on the comments. So if people have questions, sometimes it's easier to just jump in with a question that's really pertinent to kind of what we're talking about right now. So feel free. And we're going to get started. So to start us off, quick background on Google Analytics 4. I'm going to throw this out to Erik. You've been working with Google Analytics for a long time. So I don't know, what's the why, I guess, behind Google Analytics 4 and why it's coming out right now?
Yeah, it's definitely the question I wanted to know the answer to when I started to learn more about it. Like, why are we doing this? And the big reason is the way we use the internet has changed, right? Like, it's no longer, we used to use hit counters. We've moved on from those, so this is another kind of evolutionary move on. We're leaving something behind. We're going in a new direction because the way we use the internet has changed. We're much more in mobile apps now, and so that's a big piece of why Google has made this shift. I actually think, although they're kind of touting it as like the next generation of Google Analytics, it almost would have been easier if they called it something else. Because it's that much of a change, right? So I think a lot of us are, it's the new Google Analytics, but actually it might as well be called, Starship, because it's not Google Analytics as we've traditionally known it. It's something very different. They've completely changed the way that it works, and so I know we could dive into that in a minute, but like, big picture background, like why they've done this is because the way people use the web has changed. Like connected TVs were not a thing before. Multiple devices, all these things that have become sort of glued into Google Analytics over time. The way that Google Analytics was originally set up just wasn't really ideal for this future state of sort of analytics and optimization and tracking that we want to be moving towards.
Cool. So does it feel a little bit, with your past experience, a little bit like they're blowing things up and starting over, or are they pulling the best from Universal Analytics in? It's just a whole new product.
In a way, it's kind of a whole new product. Like, it's still, at a high level, it's like, you can think of it as like it's a new version of Google Analytics inside your Google Analytics account, but that it really is something very, very new. And the way that we've operated before, everything from the revamped look and feel, right? Like they've gone through and tried to clarify and simplify the new user interface. What that's going to mean for most people is it's a completely new interface you have to learn. But not only did they just move things around, they changed what things were called. They changed things, some things are no longer going to be there. There's going to be the addition of new things, and the way we measure entirely, so sessions being kind of the way we've thought about things in the past, has changed, right? They've baked in machine learning, they've baked in artificial intelligence, and a lot of this is in response to the privacy concerns, right? Like, so a lot of this is stemming from these sort of privacy conversations and the shifts that are happening in cookie tracking and stuff like that. So this is really like kind of a part and parcel shift to how do we track in that future state. So that's definitely part of it.
Cool. I love it. And in terms of deadlines and the changes, with Google Analytics because there's a hard deadline kind of
There
coming
is.
at us, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's what, July 31st? I forget the deadline off the top of my head, to be honest with you, but it's July of 23. You will no longer be able to use, you'll be able to log in and see reports, but I believe you'll no longer be able to actually use it. And then that will they'll give us a sunset window for when you can actually even see the old data. We're recommending that a lot of clients be considering, being up and running with GA4 in parallel, if not already, then soon, just because you want to be collecting that parallel data, because the data that you get, if you're an organization that looks at your analytics in any way, shape, or form, or uses it to measure or make decisions, or even just understand basic things like traffic, the measurements are going to be different. So you're going to want to try to give yourself a little bit of a runway to have those different, understand the differences between them. The other is because it's also infilled with they're infilling some of this with artificial intelligence and machine learning. The more time you give the machine to learn, the better your results are going to be, by the time you need to make that shift. So that's another piece of why, a lot of people are suggesting we make that shift earlier than later.
Amazing. Sounds good. Trevor, did you have anything kind of to add there on the background between Universal Analytics and now move to GA4?
No, I mean, the shift has been made in large part because of what's happening in the commercial space, right? Like the behavior of users online is shifting to applications, and as a result, GA4 sort of largely integrates applications and mobile apps into your ability to sort of see insights and of course sort of tie users from your applications over to your web analytics. So if you happen to be one of the few organizations, nonprofits, who actually use applications, well, this could be this could be a piece of the puzzle that we've been looking for a long time. Truthfully, not many nonprofit organizations have these applications. So as Erik said, we're sort of following suit. I think initially for a lot of organizations, ourselves included, it was unfortunate because so many of us have become accustomed to universal analytics. But over the last handful of months, we've certainly put a focus on understanding and using the new product. And from our perspective, there's certainly some real benefits that it presents.
Perfect. And I think that leads in perfectly to my next question, which I'm going to throw at Erik again first, which is major differences between GA4 and Universal Analytics, which I know you guys started to jump in on some of these answers already, which is great. But I think, people are going to really notice quickly if you were a Universal Analytics user. There are some really, really big changes, and not just in terminology, which I know.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, there's really kind of three big changes that come, and they're pretty significant. As we sort of said earlier, it's a completely new interface, which, if anybody knows, when you're learning technology, you can get accustomed to a certain way of doing things. And even if you never went and did Google Analytics training, or spent a deep dive on it, you've been able over the course of your career probably to figure out how to get around, how to find a few things, how to, run a few reports. Flip it on its head, that's all gone. Everything you've come to know is over, and you have to relearn how to work with this tool, which sucks. I'm sorry. It's, it is just what it is. And so those three big things that have forced that change. So the first is account structure, right? Like account structures, as we've come to know them, properties with views inside, that's all gone. There will not be multiple views in the new system in GA4. You might be able to filter a few things to kind of get similar structures, but you're going to have to restructure it in a way to kind of, this sliding scale, and depending on the complexity of your current account, right? Like if you're an organization that has, one or two properties, one or two views, it may not be a big shift. If you're an organization that's got a lot of sub-sites, peer-to-peer events running under the kind of main banner, a lot of that's going to need to be rethought, how you actually gain visibility on that again, because it's going to be lost in the new tracking format. So account structure is a big shift, I think, for a lot of people. And I think that it's more painful depending on the complexity of your account. If you have a lot of subdomains and different things happening, add in the fact that the account structure has changed, but also the entire user interface has changed, as well as the syntax. And that goes into the second piece, which is like the data model, the underlying data model of like how information is collected by the system has changed, which is why a lot of, I've had a few conversations with people now, and they're like, well, why do we have to, why can't the old data just go into the new data? Is Google Analytics 4, what do we do for 1, 2, and 3? The answer is, 1, 2, and 3 were all iterations on the same data model. There was sessions as the kind of core, and then everything happened inside sessions. Well, sessions are gone. They no longer exist as a kind of outer, kind of container that defines the user interaction. And now everything is events, right? So it's good in a way, right? Like, so this isn't it's annoying, but it's not necessarily bad. How about that? We're going to have to rethink how we interact. We're going to have to think about, what this kind of means in terms of our reporting. But the best way to think of it is, universal analytics was kind of like a hierarchical piece, like flow of like information nested inside one session. Here's the session, then here's all the stuff that happened inside of it. In GA4, it's a flat model. Everything is an event, which actually, if you're an organization that wants to start looking at things like data lakes, or like using BigQuery, or like connecting your analytics data to your CRM data in a way that like gives you insight into your file, it's actually a good thing, because your data model in UA was super hard to parse out in a way that it was usable in these external data lakes. There's a direct integration with BigQuery in the new GA4, which is actually super great. It's next level stuff for a lot of organizations, but it's something to be reaching towards, and it's directly integrated with Google Analytics. Right now, that's only a paid feature at the 360 level. So there is a good thing happening here. We're gaining more access to our data. It's going to be in a more usable format. But like I said, sessions are gone. So annoying.
Yes, so annoying.
The last piece, and I won't touch on this quite as long, but like, if you're familiar with Universal Analytics right now, we have events, right? So we do have events. There's an event schema right now. We have 3 kind of triggers that we can use to tag and track basic events in a website. In the new GA4, we use events as well, but events are actually the underlying architecture for the whole thing, which means you get a boatload more events. So you don't have to, you can think of it this way, like in GA4, you kind of had to work with the rules as you were given, and maybe, slide things in or get sneaky about how you might track something. In GA4, you have a lot of flexibility, right? So you can say, hey, this is an event I want to track. This is an event I want to track. I've got custom audiences. I want to track how those events are interacting with my custom audiences. You might have audiences like people who donate on the website, people who don't, people who visit the donation form but don't actually convert. The cool thing about this is they become remarketing audiences for you in some of your Google Ads properties feature on. But the big thing right now is like, it is good to have more events. With the flexibility comes the fact that you have to set it up, right? So when you're working with an out-of-the-box product, like what we had in GA4, sorry, in Universal Analytics, the rules were defined, and then you just had to sort of deal with the customizations as edge cases. GA4 gives you a lot of flexibility, and it's going to track some stuff that we actually used to have to go out of our way to track. Things like scroll rates, site search, video engagements, file downloads. These used to be customizations that we had to do in Universal Analytics. These are all out of the box, just automatically tracked in GA4. That's a good thing. But if you have an e-commerce tracking setup right now with if you're Illuminate Online, Engaging Networks, Classy, whoever you're using for your donation forms, and if you've got e-commerce tracking, you're feeding that data back in, that all needs to be rebuilt and rethought. There are going to be some one-to-one, like tools that you can use to kind of if you're using Tag Manager, that's actually better. But yeah, there's a lot of things in the fact that like the events or the new tagging system that are really good, but you are going to need to redefine a lot of these things, unfortunately, that you might have gotten used to just having at your fingertips.
Perfect. That's great. I think that's really broad reaching, all of those differences, and some of them are small, like you're talking about, but some of them are, we have to shift our thinking of how to use, I think, probably the new Google Analytics, right? It's just going to be, it's a bit of a brain shift. So it's exciting. and probably as change management stuff goes, also a little bit intimidating. So it's very cool. I like it. We had a couple of questions I'm going to get to a little bit later because I think they dovetail into our roadmap of next steps section. So there is some questions, but we're going to go next to Trevor, and Trevor is going to walk us through kind of the implications for nonprofits. And you touched a little bit on a few things already, but I think there's some unique pieces for nonprofits with this new kind of commercial, the model's a little bit more built for commerce at this point.
Yeah, I mean, Erik touched on a few things. I think certainly the most obvious implication is that your universal analytics will not, as of now, I say that because I think we're all sort of still crossing our fingers and hoping that we get, some sort of notification from Google that there is the ability to integrate data. But as of now, there's no indication from Google that your universal analytics data can be pulled into your GA4 property, right? So when we're talking about sunsetting universal analytics, when we're talking about no longer having access to that property, well, that also means that we no longer have access to the data that in a lot of cases has been collecting over the course of the 15 years that the product has been readily available. So I think certainly that's probably the largest implication and one that we're talking most frequently about. So, it's why the sort of universal recommendation right now is to get GA4 installed as quickly as possible, because of course you want some comparable data for, say, your next end of year campaign or your next Giving Tuesday, whatever it happens to be. I think, also as Erik said, look, there's a lot of intentional thought that I think needs to be put into what exactly you're going to track, and it is an implication that organizationally a lot of folks are going to have to think about. I think it's a great opportunity because the product is 15 years old. Not often is a single person or has a single person been responsible internally for the management of that product over its lifetime within an organization. So often what we see are a plethora of, say, conversion events or pieces of data in universal analytics that have been various people internally have decided to track over the years. So it is a good opportunity to sort of step back and essentially audit which data points you're really looking for insight into. But of course, that means getting people together internally, having conversations about which data points are potentially the most important. And this isn't just applicable to GA4. It's also sort of the trend we're seeing in a lot of the conversion tracking and other ads platforms. That Facebook being a great example with the aggregated conversion event. There's a real need now to more strategically think through what it is you want to prioritize as the most important pieces of data for your organization. Mm-hmm. And I think the sort of tertiary impact is that it's a learning. There's going to be an education phase that needs to take place, right? For those people that rely on universal analytics now on a day-to-day basis, it's going to take some time to get used to how the product works. It is different, as Erik mentioned. The terminology is different. Certain things that used to mean one thing now mean another thing, and so whether it's as I did for the first few weeks, have a data dictionary on your desk to just sort of say, what am I looking at, and what did this mean, and what does it now mean? There's a need to sort of reteach a product and a data model.
I love that. You're going to have to create this cheat sheet for everybody, Trevor. We put it out to the world. Everybody has access to this cheat sheet. Actually, this brings in Karen put up this comment about, is there a course you could recommend? I know Google sometimes puts out these kinds of courses too, and they're free. I don't know if anybody has heard of it. I can always look around and follow up with people as well. But do you guys know of anything on running the basics for the new GA?
Yeah. So certainly Google offers a free Google University, Google Academia, where you can become a certified professional for, and that sort of covers anything from how to use Google Analytics. Certainly in this case, GA4. A lot of those courses have now shifted over to the new product, to running ads. the truth is, as it relates to conversion tracking, there's not as many available free resources. I mean, Erik and I joke all the time that in a lot of cases you can actually now take a master's degree on conversion tracking. So the learning curve can be steep, but that's not to say it's impossible. Certainly, there are resources available, and as Tasha said, we're certainly happy to send them out. But there are some pieces that I think certainly having some help, having an expert either in house or that you bring on is most likely going to be a benefit to you, unless you're enjoy long periods of frustration and trial and error. Sometimes it's just easier to have somebody who's already pulled their hair out.
Absolutely. Erik, do you have anything to kind of add for nonprofit specific like these implications seem really, it's hard to imagine how nonprofits are going to use some of the features, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends on where you are at as an organization right now in terms of analytics. I think some organizations rely pretty heavily on analytics reporting just to understand, like the view of their revenue universe, right? Like analytics is a great tool for saying not only like how much money did we raise, but like where did it come from? What's email versus, and yes, the best report is the one that shows money in the bank and data in your primary CRM, but analytics is a great pulse check tool for using that. So if you're an organization that's relied on that, that's going to get a lot harder. If you're an organization that has is keeping tabs on certain things using analytics, if it's campaigns that you're running, advocacy actions that you're pushing people towards, if you've as Trevor said, a lot of organizations have set up very custom things for themselves over the years. So depending on the level of complexity that you've sort of invested into the product, it will be very frustrating for a little while when those things disappear. And you can't just, like air quotes, recreate them in GA4. You have to rethink them and understand, like you can't just, copy and paste. I'm in a new system and now I want to track, the advocacy conversions the way I used to. You have to rethink, like what is it? Where is it coming from? How are you tagging it? Like there's a strategy component to GA4 that you are going to have to think about, especially if you're an organization that's using it in a more complicated fashion. If you're an organization that's been using it to just like keep tabs on web traffic and things like that, then you will still find a little bit of frustration because some of those, I think I saw someone was speaking about, reports that they've kind of got right now, and that GA4 seems really focused on real-time activity. Like that's the sort of out of the can stuff is that's true, right? That's kind of what they're putting forward now. You have to kind of go through the effort of rebuilding some of those basic reports that you used to get kind of out of the box because it's the product's not measuring and compiling information in the same way. So, you will be frustrated, I think, especially if you just, leave it to July and then make the switch and go, oh, where is everything? So that's why, that's kind of why we're talking about it now, right? Give yourself time to get ahead of it, work through the frustrations before the frustrations are real.
Yeah. And I guess it gives you time too to figure out what in-house you feel confident recreating, looking at it. I was reading a really great example about GA4 and going, hey, if you normally had 1,000 video views a month and you're tracking 10 in what you think is the correct GA4 setup, something's gone wrong, right? Like if and that's the nice thing about having UA and GA4 in there at the same time running. I guess you can kind of tell whether or not something is comparable.
Mm-hmm.
Are we seeing comparable numbers between these two? Finding these sessions and translating them into a now event, and is it comparable data, and kind of getting into it now before you really are reliant on GA4. And this dovetails really well right into our last kind of discussion point. And Trevor's going to kind of walk us through our YIBU recommended roadmap of next steps. So I know this was in the comments, quite a few comments about what to do next and what that's going to look like. So take it away, Trevor.
Yeah. So I think we've mentioned it a few times, but certainly if you haven't gotten the base property, so the sort of fundamental GA4 property installed on the site, either hard-coded on the page or what we would really recommend at this point is through a Google Tag Manager container. If you haven't gotten that property set up, you certainly, I think, especially as we're in the middle of or coming up to the biggest time of year for giving, you want that comparable data for next year. So I would really recommend getting that in place as soon as possible. Secondly, I think, we talked about having some intentional conversations about what it is you're looking to track. That is a conversation I would recommend having sooner rather than later. As Erik mentioned, if you do have views now, for instance, in your universal analytics setup where you're looking at different microsites, or you're looking at, say, a team raiser or an events platform, all of this now has to be set up as essentially different UA properties. So certainly I would recommend, whether it's just something as simple as a list that you pass around internally, or getting people together in a room, what is it that we want to track? What needs to be taken from the existing universal analytics setup and put into GA4? We're in a fortunate position now where the product has been around for a while. Certainly we've had the opportunity to help a lot of our clients migrate over to GA4. So we're relatively confident. This was a very different conversation 5 months ago, 4 months ago. Now I can say with confidence, certainly I think we've run the gamut as it relates to conversions and conversion goals. Almost everything can be done. And I say almost because if I say everything, we will get a call that we will not be able to do.
You'll have to backtrack.
Right, exactly. So to hedge bets, I'm saying almost everything as of now seems it can be set up as a conversion in GA4. And certainly there was some question months ago about whether or not, the different technologies that we use in the nonprofit sector would be accepting of the new way that these conversions need to be set up. So with that information, what I would say is, look, make an exhaustive list and sort of back it out from there as you find limitations within the system. But as I've mentioned, certainly we don't seem to have run into any. I do think, one of the benefits with GA4 is that Google has recognized that there needs to be a degree of flexibility in how people create conversions, especially given the increase in the number of technologies, both commercially and of course in our sector, that are available. So, your checkout process changes, the way people purchase changes, people's behavior on website changes. All of that wasn't necessarily the case 15 years ago when the product was created. So part of the benefit is that they've opened the floodgates, so to speak, in how these conversions can be set up to adapt to these different technologies. That's my tangent on that subject, and I'll move on. So I do think getting an exhaustive list together is certainly important, and starting to think through what you want to do with your universal analytics data. I don't think we at EBU have a perfect answer yet as to what it is, or where it is you should be keeping that universal analytics data. But I know certainly that we on a regular basis are having conversations about, is there a place that it can be placed, or is it simply a matter of exporting, your Google Analytics, your universal analytics data and keeping it? Certainly I understand that some of these metrics aren't one-to-one, but understanding website visitors during December over the last 5 years, regardless of whether or not it translates perfectly to GA4 as a metric, is going to be something you want to be aware of and keep. So starting to form a plan around what it is you want to do with that data, or reaching out to experts in the field about what they would do or what we can do with it. I think those are certainly some of the initial steps that we're recommending.
Mm-hmm.
Nice. I do believe, and I know I posted up Aaron's question there about what to do with the data, which you kind of answered. And I believe I was reading that the end of 2024 is when all of your UA data is no longer accessible at all, and it just disappears. So, there is still time for that data, but the collection of the data will end in July when you officially are moved over to GA4. But the data itself should be downloadable in some capacity, even if it's in a CSV, I guess.
Yeah. And there's a few things I would add to, when you think about exporting your data, obviously you can just export the data, but then to Trevor's point, it's kind of where are you going to go with it? one thing that I was reading that someone suggested, which I thought was a great idea, is it's not necessary. It's like understanding what you as the organization need the data for, because even exporting your data into like Google Data Studio reports can be really helpful, because then you can just say, okay, hey, I've got a snapshot report. I've exported this data into a snapshot report, so I know month over month for the last number of years. Here's my kind of hit list of key information, and that's one way to kind of save it. You could PDF it, and keep it there. It's going to lose its source in terms of like that data automation coming into Data Studio, but there's also, I read, a Google Sheets add-on for Google Analytics that could be a good way, depending on if you just want the raw data, to bring that in as well. So if you're a paying Google Analytics 360 client, you can bring it into BigQuery, although to what Trevor said, apples and oranges. So there's not a lot of value in comparing them right now, because they're just counted so differently. But I think, like looking at some historical options, or looking at options for keeping some track of your historical data could become pretty important. So maybe that's something we'll post something about in the next little while. We've got a few things we can suggest.
Yeah, and I think it's still evolving, right? It's a brand new product. I mean, and I think I've come across this a few times in conversations with some younger nonprofits who recently did a website redesign. For some of them, they already have GA4 running and actually don't know that it's been running because someone kindly set it up for them. So this may already be running in the background. Hopefully it is, but I like you noted, that really is truly the first step here. And hopefully you've already done it. But if you haven't, I think that's a big piece to just even get the basics set up and then start to focus in right on those. How do we take what we have been tracking, decide and audit it, and and then go to creating it? And I know there's our team's kind of been working through it with a bunch of our clients, so we've seen a lot of different events and how to set them up, which is great. And there is one extra question here that came through. It's beyond my GA4 knowledge, but noticed a higher degree of sampling than before.
Mm-hmm.
Is that what others have experienced? Any suggestions on how to overcome that?
So higher degree of sampling in GA4. So one of the things that could be happening, and it's probably going to be account to account, is how much people have opted in or opted out of being tracked, and then that window, like that sample set, is, as I understand it anyway, infilled by machine learning and artificial intelligence. So the application is basically saying, well, where we lack the data, we're going to make informed decisions about what that data point might have looked like based on other things that we can assume. So it's possible that's actually what you're seeing, is some of that machine learning interacting with the data and actually sampling it at a higher rate or making it appear so. But again, I'd say the product for us even is still so new that that some of these things we just haven't had the time to see how that kind of stuff plays out long term.
Okay, very cool. And I mean, the machine learning part of Google Analytics 4 is cool on its own and could be an entire conversation about machine learning and what's coming our way. But this has been fantastic. Thanks, guys. I don't know if Trevor, you had anything additionally you wanted to add, but I think my hope is to kind of gather this conversation, put together a little bit of a GA4 cheat sheet for people who were here today, and just send around some learnings. I got to get out of Trevor's head this data dictionary he described, down on paper for myself, even, which would be great. And yeah, the Yibu team, obviously lots of experience on the subject, happy to answer questions. So if people have further things they'd like to know, please reach out. We're happy to help. And we're super excited. I think, Erik, the last thing you mentioned about privacy is a great dovetail into the next LinkedIn Live we plan to talk about, which is donor acquisition and how privacy laws are going to affect donor acquisition. I'm going to be talking with Elise, who has lots of knowledge of Facebook ads and just revenue generating activities in general. And she's going to kind of bring all that knowledge of how those privacy changes are really going to change up donor acquisition. So thanks so much, guys. Thank you, everyone who attended.
Thanks for the great questions, and thanks for hosting us, Tasha.
Absolutely. All right. Thanks, guys. Bye.
Appreciate it. Take care, everyone. Bye.
Bye all.